Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, if you do enjoy the video that you came here to watch, do me a favor, go ahead and hit that little red subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. It really does help my audience grow. It really does help this channel grow. It means more than you realize. So go ahead, hit that little red button. Also, remember, full episodes of the Aaron Torres podcast, wherever you download your podcast, Apple, Spotify, etc. Now, here is the video that you came here for.
Want to switch gears and not really switch gears, just kind of continue the college football playoff conversation, because we just talked about Tennessee, obviously what their loss meant for the playoff picture, not only for them, but for everybody else. But there were two teams among, frankly, many on Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening that did survive, did not look good in the process, but now we get to look ahead a little bit. And so I want to talk about two teams that have quite a bit in common and quite a bit at stake next week. I'm, of course, talking about Michigan and Ohio State. To their credit, both teams survive. Both teams are undefeated. And boy, oh boy, do we have a mega showdown next Saturday in Columbus. Each team is 11-0. The winner all but guaranteed a college football playoff spot. As a matter of fact, I think it is a guarantee. Even if they were to somehow lose in the Big Ten championship game, which they're not going to, I do still think the winner would get in. But neither team looked good. And so what I want to do is talk about each team and kind of decipher, okay, which one of the two should we be more worried about after uninspired performances by each on Saturday? And so I'll just kind of give you, for those of you who weren't able to kind of watch the games minute by minute, second by second, frame by frame, play by play, I'll just give you a quick recap of what happened for each. Michigan was the early game, so let's start with Michigan. And they were kind of an interesting deal, right? Because they were playing an Illinois team that really kind of mirrored them in terms of style of play. Illinois, Michigan, they make your grandfather very proud, is what I would tell you. Each wants to run the ball. Each wants to control the clock. Each wants to control the line of scrimmage. Each wants to play great defense. And so you kind of saw the scenario where if everything broke the right way, it could be a little bit competitive late. But obviously the one thing that we couldn't see was Michigan's star player, Blake Corum, who was very much in the Heisman Trophy candidate, running back, one of the leading rushers in college football, went down late in the second quarter with an injury. Thankfully, he did return to the game. As of right now, we don't have much of a status on him, but he returns for one play, does not play the rest of the game, and Michigan's offense basically disappears without him. At one point, they actually trail 17-10. They trail 17-10 going into the fourth quarter. And to their credit, they do find a way to win under very adverse conditions. They haven't developed a pass game all year, which is something we're probably going to talk about throughout the week on this show. But don't have your star running back, don't have much of a pass game, rely a lot on special teams and defense. Jake Moody, the kicker, Lou Groza Award winner, Jim Harbaugh was gushing about this guy after the game. I'm going to go full LeBron James. Not one, not two, but three fourth quarter field goals for Jake Moody. So Michigan relies on its defense, on its special teams. I'd say this, you ask Brett Bielema, he says they relied on the refs too. Some questionable calls go in Michigan's favor, but they do survive to improve to 11-0 next week. Then there's Ohio State. Ohio State kicked off shortly after that Michigan-Illinois game went final. And to be blunt, it was kind of the Ohio State team that we've seen all year. Offense is kind of, sort of, not really clicking. They actually trail 13-10 at halftime, get going in the second half. Now, to be fair to Ohio State, I have to be fair here, right? Michigan deal with the Blake Corum injury. Ohio State is dealing with injuries of its own, and I want to make that clear. TreVeyon Henderson, their star running back, this poor kid has not been right most of the year. Did try to play, was not great early, left the game, did not return. I didn't see it, but I was told he was in a walking boot for parts of the game or when he left the stadium. So he was banged up. Obviously, they haven't had a star wide receiver in Jackson Smith and Jigba all year. Now, obviously, Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka have stepped up, but it doesn't change the fact that Ohio State's dealing with injuries too. It also doesn't change the fact that they very much struggled at Maryland. As I said, they were trailing at halftime 13-10, were able to rally. They actually took a 3-point lead late into the fourth quarter, kick a field goal, but it's worth noting, Maryland gets the ball back with under a minute to go. Maryland, by the way, actually outgained Ohio State as well in this game. Maryland gets the ball back. To the credit of Ohio State's defensive front, there is a strip sack return for a touchdown. And so all of a sudden, a 6-point lead becomes a 13-point lead, and that game looks way more one-sided than it actually was. And so now the question becomes, who are you more worried about? Michigan, which, again, barely survives against Illinois, or Ohio State, which barely survives against Maryland? And to me, the answer is actually pretty simple. Now, we don't know about injury statuses, but if Blake Corum came back into that game yesterday on Saturday, I'm optimistic that he'll be able to play. And if he's able to play, I'll just be blunt. I'm much more concerned about Ohio State. Now, that's not me sitting here on a Sunday into a Monday telling you that Ohio State is definitively going to lose to Michigan. But what concerns me about Ohio State, it's the kind of the simple, you know what it honestly reminds me of? It reminds me of that old saying, like, I think your parents probably tell you that in middle school when you have somebody bullying you or you have a friend that turns into an enemy. What do your parents always tell you? When somebody shows you who they are, believe them, right? Isn't that kind of Ohio State this year? Because just think about it at the most basic level, right? Think about Ohio State this year. They come into the year, and we're talking about them as potentially having a historically great offense. Now, I understand Jackson Smith-Njigba's hurt. I understand Travion Henderson's been in and out of the lineup all year. But you go through the Ohio State schedule, I would argue in 3 separate instances, including the 2 best defenses they've played, they have really struggled offensively this year. Go back to the Iowa game, middle of the season. I believe they were coming off a bye at that point. You're sitting there saying, okay, Ohio State off of a bye, it's really going to click. Yeah, Iowa's defense is okay, very good, maybe even, but that offense is so bad it's not going to matter. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. But not before Ohio State was pretty underwhelming. Ohio State, to the credit of its defense, forced a few turnovers. They forced a few punts. Ohio State continues to get the ball back, continues to kind of create some offense, but not a ton. 5 separate times in the first half against Iowa, Ohio State was unable to punch the ball into the end zone, had to settle for 5 field goals in the first half. Now, eventually, Iowa's defense was just on the field for so long that they got overwhelmed and just didn't have enough gas in the tank, and the game got one-sided. But that was far from a vintage performance from Ohio State. Nobody's making instructional videos on their offense to sell on eBay or YouTube or Craigslist or whatever, okay? And yes, I just referenced Craigslist, which I'm pretty sure nobody other than, whatever. Nobody's used Craigslist in a long time. But you get the point. The offense was not good that day. You know what else the offense wasn't good? Against the best team Ohio State's played so far. Against Penn State, we talked about it. This was a team that struggled. They trailed 21-16 late in the middle of the fourth quarter is really the fair way to say it, about 9 minutes to go. And that was when all that chaos broke loose, right? That was the game where there was the this, the that. There's a strip sack. There's an INT by the defensive lineman, JT Tuimoloau. I don't know how to say his name. I apologize. I just bring it up to say that in that game, Ohio State was very much on the ropes until Penn State completely fell apart late. And then there was Saturday where once again, in a big game, they struggled to move the ball for big chunks and struggled to survive in that game. So that's what Ohio State's issues are. They've shown you who they are. They're up, they're down, they're inconsistent. The offense just hasn't felt consistent all year, even though they put up a lot of points. Now, Michigan, on the other hand, they've shown you who they are too. Now, their ceiling isn't as high as Ohio State, and that's why I'm not sitting here on a Sunday or a Monday definitively telling you Ohio State is losing to Michigan next week. No, I think it's a little too early to tell, and we'll get into that in a minute. But with Michigan, they've shown you who they are too, and I would argue until Blake Corum's injury on Saturday, they were the most consistent team in college football. They're going to run the ball right at you with Blake Corum, with that offensive line. They are going to play great defense. They are going to have incredible special teams with Jake Moody, who, knock on wood, has been incredible this year, including Saturday in the clutch. And they're not going to let J.J. McCarthy beat him. Now, there's an argument that their quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, at some point they're going to have to let him loose, right? The whole reason he won the job was because we were told he has higher upside than the guy that he beat out, Cade McNamara. Now, Cade McNamara is injured, so it doesn't matter. He would have been playing anyway. But we've been told that this guy was the X factor, and we haven't really seen that so far this year. But at the same time, Michigan has shown you who they are. They're going to run. They're going to play great defense. And as I've said, I think they're the most consistent team in college football this year. Even Georgia. Georgia struggled on the road against Missouri. Georgia wasn't great on Saturday against Kentucky. I mean, Kentucky was driving. They scored to make it 16-6. They convert the 2-point conversion. It is a 1-score game in the middle of the fourth quarter. So Michigan, up until Blake Corum gets hurt, they've been the same team every single week. And I do think at a certain point, now listen, can Ohio State elevate themselves for this incredible game, rivalry game, whatever? Yes, they can. But I also think like at a certain point, if 11 straight weeks you have been largely inconsistent, especially since Big Ten play started, you're probably just an inconsistent football team. And so listen, here's the bottom line. At the end of the day, we're going to break down this game later on in the week, and we'll get into all the details, and I'll be blunt. Right now, it's hard to definitively pick a winner because we don't know the status of Blake Corum. We don't know the status of TreVeyon Henderson. I want to watch the weather report because obviously if it's cold and icy like it was last year, that's advantage Michigan. The early report is it's going to be pretty cold, precipitation in the morning, little rain, maybe even a little bit snow, and that is a noon Eastern kickoff. So I'm not sitting here saying that Michigan's definitively going to win. But if you ask me after yesterday, who I'm more concerned about going into this game, it's the one that has been inconsistent all year. It's Ohio State, and I am so fascinated to watch this game on Saturday. This should be a good one. Both teams are 11-0, but there are plenty of questions. All right, take a quick